I've just got one thing that I want to address briefly, and then we'll be glad to answer any questions that you all might have about whatever it is that's on your mind. I know I've heard from several of my constituents. I've heard from Oklahomans around the state who are less than pleased with what appears to be the new Republican majority's plan for funding core services in the state of Oklahoma. They continue to push for tax cuts. At the same time, they try to raise fees on working Oklahomans to the tune of some $600 million. When the people back home realize that they either didn't get any benefit from this tax cut that was passed this year, or maybe it's $30 this year in 2016, but yet they had to pay $12 more for a license to drive, or they had to pay more to get a hunting license or a fishing license, and so whatever savings they might have seen in that tax cut are evaporated thanks to their increase in fees. They're going to be upset. They're going to be angry. And my caucus is frustrated with it, and we think that you need to be upfront and honest with folks. Public schools, transportation, public safety, health care, they desperately need resources. They were sorely underfunded in this year's budget. We had opportunities to do that. Our priorities instead from the majority party are to increase fees on working families and to spend almost $100 million on fixing buildings instead of fixing the future for children in Oklahoma.
Signed by the governor, and Jerry Fenton immediately said he's going to challenge it.
Mm-hmm.
If it goes through, what happens to the tax cut to the $120 million that's supposed to fix this capital?
I think it'll be struck down, and I'll play pundit for a minute. Pat McGuigan gave me a compliment a few weeks ago, and he said, "Oh, I like your punditry." So I'll give you my pundit, my Richard Morset on Sunday morning approach, right? Here's and I have no evidence to back this up whatsoever. It's just kind of a gut reaction that I have, and I didn't run this by Mary Ann, so she may get mad at me for doing this. But let's look at it from sort of the 30,000 feet perspective. The Senate President Pro Tem and Senator Jolly, Senator Mazie, they didn't really want a tax cut this year anyway. They didn't want one last year. They wanted bonds to pay for the capital repair. And so what happens? They put together a tax cut plan that they include the money in, they log roll it together to include $60 million to fix the Capitol. Things that I believe are unconstitutional. You can't do them both in the same bill. I think Senator Mazie and Senator Jolly and Senator Brinkman know that. And so, in essence, they didn't want to do a tax cut, and they don't believe in funding the capital repairs in the way that it's been passed out of the House and Senate so far. So maybe, just maybe, it's in their grand scheme of things to say, you know what? Well, the only way the agreement was cut, the only way that it would be done in the bill as the way it was done now. It couldn't run two separate bills. The only agreement came down to, well, you have to run them as a pairing. I don't know who made that ultimate decision, but I'm certain that Senator Brinkman played a part in that. And at the end of the day, not only did he win on his comp deal that the governor and the speaker weren't real keen on, but he may end up winning on the tax cut and on the bond issues for the Capitol building, because I think they were going to be struck down as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, and we'll be back here next year to do it probably the way Senator Brinkman wants to do it.
So you think it's a conspiracy?
I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm just saying I have nothing to back it up. When you look at it and you see, well, why did they do it that way? Especially considering the Supreme Court has said over and over again that they have grown tired, weary, I think is the word they've used. They've grown weary of having to tell the legislature over and over again, quit log rolling bills into one. Why did they do it this way? Maybe that's why.
Senator Bingman suggested today that the possibility of a bond issue being considered this session for the Native American Cultural Center and the Pops Museum is not an impossibility. Is there any chance Democrats can get on board with that?
Our position when it comes to the bond issues for the Cultural Center has always been the same. We support it. We believe it needs to be done. We would have appreciated a better approach or a different approach to how it all came together, but we weren't here however many years ago when this whole process started. And so now we have to deal with the situation that's before us, and we believe that the bond proposal was probably the best way to get it done. We still believe that. Do I think that a bond proposal for the Cultural Center and the Pop Center can be done this year? Having visited with Speaker Shannon and knowing his pretty strong aversion to bond proposals at all this year, whether they're for the Capitol or for Cultural Center, I can tell you that Senator Brinkman is exponentially more optimistic than I would ever be on that.
So say he's looking at possible revenue sources that could fund it. The budget's already done, they can't touch that. Bond issue, he says, is probably not going to happen. It's possible. He said there's revenue sources. He wouldn't say what they'd be. Any ideas?
You're talking about the revenue source. Is he discussing the revenue source that's in that $30 million revolving fund for maintenance? Because I think that's where, I mean, most of us from both sides of the aisle believe that that's probably where the money's going to come from. If it's going to come from anywhere, then you take $20 million for the cultural center this year and maybe $10 million for POP. That's your $30 million that's in that fund. That's probably where it'll come from. I mean, if you ask my caucus, we believe that's what their intent is with that. You ask Republican senators, and that's what they believe the intent is. But you can't get anybody to confirm it for you. But I think that that's a likelihood.
Then the panel would recommend that. Don't both houses of the legislature have to approve?
I don't know. I don't know exactly. I mean, we have a say in the process, and I don't know whether we have to vote up or down to approve the money being spent that way, or vote up or down to reject the money being spent that way. My understanding is it may be a rejection, which means that if the speaker refused to call it up, then the vote would never take place, and so therefore the money could still be spent. I think that's the way it is, but I'd have to take a closer look at it. I know that the House and Senate have an approval process, but it may not be an affirmative approval
Do
process.
you think that the POPs and the Native American Cultural Center are linked because of the Tulsa, Oklahoma City thing? I mean, do you think
Oh, no doubt. And I think Senator Bingman, being from the Tulsa area, has made it clear over the last number of years that if $20 million or $40 million of state money was going to be spent to complete the Cultural Center in Oklahoma City, that he wanted something in return for Tulsa. And so I think that they are linked in that regard.
The proposal, as I understand it, for the Tulsa Pops Museum would be some sort of revenue bond that they would be able to pay back through the revenue generated from the parking garage.
Yeah, and
That
would
might get some traction in the House.
I think it could, but we haven't really discussed the POPs issue in our caucus this year, and so I couldn't tell you. And just understanding where the Speaker Shannon is when it comes to bonds, just that four-letter word is something he just doesn't want to take to his caucus. They're just really not happy about it. Because I honestly believe that he might. I think the votes are there in the House of Representatives to pass a bond for the Cultural Center. The votes were probably there to pass a bond for capital repairs as well. The only difference is there when it came to capital repairs, our caucus was less than pleased about the idea of the governor saying, well, we're going to cut taxes and then take bonds out. We thought, well, why, if you're going to cut taxes, well, it doesn't make sense to go for a bond proposal. We supported the governor using that money that would have gone to tax cuts and instead using that to invest in public schools who've been severely cut and things like that. And then if you wanted to go out and take out a bond, because we simply don't have the resources to do all that's necessary, then it would make more sense for us, especially at such a ridiculously low interest rate that the state could get now. That's kind of where our perspective was on that issue.
And you think the votes are there for the Pops Museum too, perhaps?
I don't know that for a fact, and I would say they would be tougher to get that done. Just because the Cultural Center has steel in the air, and that's a big difference. Because it's already there, because we're paying, I don't know, up to $1 million a year. I've heard estimates there, and for security and maintenance of a vacant building now. It's an embarrassment to the city, to the state, and we want to get it done. So we've already invested money there, and so therefore you'd get the votes are there to say let's at least get it completed. Whereas with the Pops Museum, there's no dirt that's been moved yet. So therefore I can't handicap how that would go on the floor.
The legislature, or the House Democrats said, even if you build the center, the American Indian Cultural Center, the cost of maintaining it is going to be, they have 12 people now, it's not even open. So they're talking about continuing operating expenses. Everybody's talking about there's a point where you should cut your losses. So why didn't you say, look, there's no real need, no city, nobody's coming forward saying, here's some money, this is a tragedy on it. Why not just sell the land?
Our caucus believes in the project and believes that it could help create another tourist destination in the city. We think that in the city and the state. Let's be honest, there are folks that live outside of our borders who still, when asked about the state of Oklahoma, think cowboys and Indians. I mean, they'll still say that in New York and California. And there are folks who will want to come here to go see the Cowboy Hall of Fame, as I've always referred to it, or the Native American Cultural Center and other things. And I think it would be wonderful for our city and our state to offer that part of our history and our culture to visitors. And I think that it would create a revenue generation for tourists that would help to hopefully pay for it over time. And so we don't want to see it scrapped and done away with. We actually believe in the project. We wish it would have been funded a little bit differently, but now that it is where it is, we need to get it done. We need to complete it, and I think the will of the body is there to do that. We were a little concerned about if they're going to fund it through this revolving maintenance fund, so be it. But we want to be told honestly that's what the money's going to be used for. We just want to have upfront discussion about how it's going to get finished.
Oklahoma City Mayor Mick Cornett yesterday at the Mayor's Development Roundtable pretty much blasted, it seemed to me, the legislature for its inattentiveness to urban needs, particularly Tulsa and Oklahoma City, which he said contributes 70% of the state's economic growth and revenue. How would you categorize the urban-rural success, failure, cooperation this session?
I haven't seen the divide in terms of a series of legislation that's come through. I haven't really seen that divide as wide as it has been in years past, maybe because some of the issues just haven't percolated to the surface. However, this water legislation that's floating out here now that would redo the water districts, that may divide the urban and rural areas pretty significantly. Matter of fact, I think a lot of members of my caucus, even the rural members, are less than pleased with what they're trying to do. And so I'd say right now the divide has been minimized a little bit. I haven't really heard a lot, and so I'd have to visit with Mayor Cornett to figure out exactly what he's frustrated about. But if this particular bill is advanced and passed, well then yes, I'd say that there's your real indicator of a rural versus urban chasm within the legislature.
We're poised to end by next Friday. Is there anything that still needs to be done before they get out of here?
Sure. In my perspective, there's certainly things that should be done. We're leaving. If we leave this building next Friday or today or whenever we leave this building and we haven't adequately funded education, which in the budget that they've passed, education has been short funded again, and come December of this year, we're looking at our school districts are looking at taking a net cut. If we leave here without properly funding common education, without taking care of troopers, Department of Corrections employees, if we do those things, just get out of here without doing at least those three things, which the resources exist to take care of those needs. If we do that, then that's a travesty and that's a shame. And those things should have been taken care of. And it's basically sits in the Republican majority's lap and the governor's lap for not adequately taking care of those needs. And state employees, for example, are still. State employees have seen over the last several years their buying power and their paycheck drop each and every year because without an increase in their benefit allowance, without an increase in their pay or even a bonus, we've watched what they make every year dramatically be reduced dramatically because of increased health care costs. And so those individuals simply asked for $12 million this year for a one-time bonus. The money existed to take care of it, and they didn't get that done. And so if you're a state employee or a teacher or a trooper or a correctional officer, you say, yeah, there's work to be done, and we can go to May 31st if we have to constitutionally. So let's stick around. Let's go find. Let's adjust a few things and find. It's about, I don't know, maybe about $50 million or a little less than that it would take to meet those needs, and that money exists just in building funds alone, without having to touch another agency, and that's what ought to be done.
Yep, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions potentially are through tax credits and deductions that are given to businesses and industries, but yet there doesn't seem to be the political will really on either party to really tackle these tax credits. What are your thoughts? Do you think that there's any hope that some significant savings to the state can be realized?
Not this year. I don't think there's any real significant savings that'll be realized with the tax credit situation this year, and that's unfortunate. My caucus absolutely supports revising the tax credit system in Oklahoma. We support what Representative David Dank has done, but the reality is that lobbyists and the suits out here get paid a lot of money, a lot more than we legislators do, to come out and ensure that the industries and companies that they represent continue to get their tax handouts. A lot of them create jobs and are great for business, and then there are a lot of them that don't. Our perspective, though, is this. When we raised this issue, it was our caucus who raised this issue for the first time back in 2009, I believe. When we raised this issue and said that we give away $5 billion a year in tax credits and exemptions, which almost equaled the state budget, We raised it in a way to say, let's get our hands around the situation, stop wasting tax dollars so that we can use some of those to continue to invest in education, healthcare, transportation, and public safety. That's what we want to see done. That's what tax credit reform should be used for. However, we're afraid that Governor Fallin would, if she ever got behind a tax credit reform package, which she's yet to do, but if she ever did that, it would only be in a way such that she could continue to further reduce the income tax rate in Oklahoma, which would only continue to erode resources for education, healthcare, transportation, public safety. And that's where our guys are. Our guys are going, well, we'd love to help if you give us the opportunity. If you can run a bill out, we'll be glad to help you. But we're not going to help you by just simply allowing you to erode revenue for education any further.
Yesterday's bill, A and B committee approved that unclassifies the number of employees. In fact, all Department of Recreation and Tourism will be unclassified as July 1st. It's a pretty close vote. Your Democrats are pretty upset about it.
We are.
What's your position?
No, the move to declassify positions in state government with our state agencies is the wrong approach to state government. When Republicans were in the minority and Senator Stipe and other Democrats ran this building, Republicans screamed and hollered for a system like the classification system, so that way the patronage or the good old boy system would be put to an end. That happened. The classification system came in, and so now a senator or representative can't just pick up the phone, intimidate an agency head, and say, hire my friend. They can't do that anymore. But what apparently the Republicans want to do now is completely ignore history, ignore their own previous history, their own previous desires to install the classification system and say, well, now that we're in control, and they may be in control for the foreseeable future, now we're okay with rolling that back so that way we can return to the patronage days of old. Our caucus does not support that. And we believe that any attempt to do that on the House floor will be met with strong opposition, strong bipartisan opposition. And I think there's a legitimate likelihood that we can defeat the bill on the floor.